So welcome everybody. I'd say it's nice to see you all, but we're doing the video mute thing. But I hope everybody had a really fantastic Thanksgiving and had a chance to unplug because it's been, if your lives are anything like mine, then it's probably been, I don't know, the longest. These 8 months have been the longest decade of your life. So, I want to thank you all for taking a few minutes to join us. All of these topics, especially this first one on Zooming, were driven by a survey I did on the basic course listserv about a month and a half ago. And so this is all what people wanted to hear about as we kind of do this little kind of almost boot camp / share over what we learned in the fall so that we can prepare for the spring in a better way, because it looks like our springs are going to be just like our falls in a lot of cases. So the goal of this is meant to be a discussion. John Arthos and Cindy Smith of Indiana are here to lead the discussion and the share with everybody. And I'm sure that they're going to bring a lot to help facilitate this in a way that we're able to take a lot away in 1 hour. Really, I want to thank everybody for being willing to do this when we're so tired. I want to thank John and Cindy especially for volunteering to take the lead on this session. And lastly, I want to thank Fountainhead. They're supplying each of you with a gift card for a coffee, as well as doing a raffle for all the times so each time you attend one of these sessions you signed up for, your name gets thrown in a hat. And at the end, there'll be 3 prizes, pretty significant prizes. I don't know exactly what, but I know that each one's going to give people a choice between a gift or a gift card. So, should add a little bit of fun to the whole week. But anyway, I want to thank you all again for being here. I hope this proves to be as valuable for you all as we're intending it to be. I know with John and Cindy leading it, it will be. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to them for this afternoon's session.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joe, and Susan as well. The topic of our session I'm going to share on the screen here. It's the same as the title of the description in the conference, and here are the agenda items that we advertised for it. The plan we have for this session, as you guys saw, is to have this to be very collaborative for all of us, for all of you all who already have a lot of experience with how to do this now can share. It's not going to be presentation based, it's going to be discussion based. And so what I'm going to try to do is move us through these topics as well as we can, so that we can get most of them, hopefully most of them. But the plan is for us to use the chat very aggressively, for us to create a kind of a resource for all of us after we leave this session, that we have lots of cool links and tips and things we can use, what we all share with each other. That's the plan. And so in order to accomplish that, what I've done is I have invited Cindy to be the master of ceremonies choreographer of the discussion. And for purposes of this Zoom meeting, she has absolute power. She's going to, as I sort of introduce the topics, you can start typing in your comments, questions, tips, resource links. You can ask to be recognized. What she'll do is, as we go through these, is she will try to spot patterns within the chat room, note sort of common themes or questions that are bubbling up that she can ask us. If there's somebody who really says something that she feels needs to be elaborated, she might ask that person to tell us a little bit more. She'll just have a feel for how this discussion will move as we work through these issues. So I think that's my current plan. Now, I should say the origin of this and the origin of the agenda items that you saw there is that in the spring, as we made the turn over to Zoom, I found my own classroom experience having this very unsatisfying, uncanny feeling to it. It didn't feel complete or energized like the regular classroom was, right? I was teaching at the time. And so I sort of set myself the challenge of trying to figure out if there were ways that I could bring it closer to that more energized, more fulfilling experience. And by the summer, when I was teaching public speaking, I felt as though I had gotten close to that. And so I wanted to share those things. That's not the function of this conversation that we're going to have. We're going to actually try to figure that out ourselves as we go. And I'm just going to be labeling the topics. So here are the rough areas that I hope we can cover. This visual interface, this sort of replacement for the classroom. What is this thing? You know, we want to think about that, right? Even ontologically. How do we address the production values? How we can use chat functions in all the varieties of ways that it can be used. How we can overcome the challenges of the breakout interface and take advantages of its affordances. How we can choreograph the overall classroom experience for public speaking and for communication in ways that are meaningful and invigorating. So the first thing we're going to do, just sort of to do some table setting, is we're going to talk about ways that Zoom is bad and ways that Zoom is good, right? So you can actually start typing those, your feelings about that right away as soon as something occurs to you. So we know, for starters, we have to stipulate, right, that there are serious challenges as we move into this virtual space for all kinds of reasons, right? We know that it's not good for lecture classes. We know that there are real problems with access, right? And then there are problems with identity and representation and all these things that we have to be very, very sensitive and attentive to. And so the first question I want us to talk about is ways Zoom is really a problem for us. If we can sort of spill some of those issues out into the chat, if Cindy sees somebody that she'd like to, you can also raise your hand and Cindy might call on you. I have some listed here so you get a sense of it. Let's see what we can come up with initially. I'll unshare for a minute. And I already see we're having stuff. Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, so this is definitely, I think we've all been here. It's difficult to, Yvonne observes, it's difficult to see if people are actively listening when their cameras are off. Awkward close-ups. Howard, this is a really great observation. Could you share just briefly what are some of the tips you give students when you talk about this? I think it's a great point.
I have a little bit of an advantage having spent 2 years in front of a camera on television. But one of my students, for example, was giving his oral presentation, and he was sitting there, right above his head in his closet behind him was a stuffed animal. And I had to explain to them that you have to have a background that kind of meets the presentation. And then the other ones are the ones who pretty much sit like this.
Yes.
Or they do it sitting on their bed or lying down or in the kitchen with the kids playing behind them. And as a result, they're in the room, but they're not really in the room. And they'll come back at me next week with, when did you talk about this? And I'll say, I talked about this last class, but they missed it because there's so much around them. And I have to spend half my class emphasizing you need to focus as if you're in the classroom and watch your background and watch your camera position. I'm looking at my own camera position right now and my head is cut off. Okay. And I have to remind them that you need to get your whole face on camera because it's hard to read body language in a public speaking class when you can't see them.
Yeah.
And they used to spend time talking about posture and how they stood and not leaning against the wall. And now I spend more time about, well, you need to improve your lighting.
Super helpful. Super helpful. Let's see. Other things that are coming up have to do technically with things like being able to hear and also kind of engage with students, and how breakout rooms are more challenging for doing that. And it's harder for the instructor to keep track of what's actually happening in there. That's from Jessica. Julie talks about distractions in the background. I've definitely got what Kim has going on where students are ghosting which is similar to what Howard just said. So they're there, but they're not really there. And just seeing versus not seeing the students, and how that overlaps with accountability. And I would add to that, like the dynamic of the class, the community of the class, when half of the people are not visible. So those are a number of the things that are showing up in chat. And another point just now from Anne about turn taking is really difficult. And I struggle with that in a real physical environment. So like not interrupting and managing who's going to be next. These are really good observations.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to stop. I'm going to reshare here the PowerPoint slide. And some other things that we want to make sure remember is Zoom fatigue, obviously, right? What I call the hiding phenomenon. You mentioned that, but there's also the ways in which you can be half present. Right now, you consider to be, reading your email, et cetera, and there's that whole issue. There are what I call breakout conspiracy corners. The dead zone, what I meant there was, you get a class started, maybe this is a group of first-year students, and the students are all staring at you, right? So, what are techniques for overcoming that? The whole alienation effect of this virtual reality experience to begin with. Right, there's that piece of it, which is a very complex thing, which I imagine we'll be writing about as researchers for some years. So those are some things to imagine. Then, if we want to think about the ways that Zoom is good, so
I forgot about
okay, yeah. So there's lots of ways in which we're discovering, right, that Zoom has some affordances that we hadn't thought about, that we hadn't expected. And so I wanted us to see if we could come up with maybe a list of those types of things. The ways that it maybe equalizes the social space in the way where in the old classroom, you're standing up in front of the classroom, the students are sitting back passively. Now there's interesting changes in our relationships to each other. Right, so that seems to change the dynamics of the learning experience. Is it a more intimate medium? I have some feelings about that. What do you think about that? What about, especially for us public speaking and communication scholars and teachers, what about interactivity? Does it add or subtract from interactivity, and in what ways? So let me ask Cindy. You're starting to get some people talking about that?
Yeah, I'm writing down a few things. This is great. Everybody has so many things. So we're talking about strengths, right? Enabling introverts to take more risks, some flexibility for students who might otherwise have some scheduling issues. Chat channel is really nice for them to be able to commiserate with each other. How you can have everybody respond in chat at the same time. So lots of commentary about how chat really augments things really helpfully. It's convenient. It can be good for working students and parents. I have my students doing a group project right now, so I'd add to that they can easily, it's no longer an obstacle that they have to meet at 1 a.m. at the library, right? They can schedule their own Zoom meetings. There is a question here that I want to be sure that we get to at some point about grading. John, when would you like me to? Okay, so Margaret's question is really good, which is basically to what extent are we adapting our rubrics and our methods of evaluating delivery based on the online presentation environment, eye contact, framing the body on the camera, et cetera. That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, folks, please offer your advice or observations or about that. That's a wonderful question. Mm-hmm. While you're doing that, let me just mention a couple of other items. Have you noticed that it seems to me, at least anyway, that the regular classroom, I never cold call students. It feels a little violent to me, right? But for some reason that I haven't figured out yet, Zoom, it allows you to cold call students if you do it in just the right way. And I'm not sure why that is. So that's one thing I've noticed. The other thing that I've noticed in terms of affordances is office meetings have never been easier because, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to have time after the class, because if you're a student, all you have to do to attend an office meeting is nothing at all, right? You just stay on the line. And so you're invited into the office, you just sort of can stay there if that's how you want to run your offices. Okay, Cindy, so what are you seeing?
So the suggestions are really good here. That considering a number of the things as nonverbal, in the category of like nonverbal delivery elements. So for instance, Ariane talks about requesting the students show themselves from the waist up. And Kim is talking about having, actually, Kim, would you say a little bit about this? Because I think you're going to be able to do it more richly than me reading your little.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So my TAs and I have 6 TAs, and we debated for a long time whether or not to include from the waist up or full body. And we actually all agreed. We tried one this semester with just waist up, and one with full body, and then surveyed the students. And we actually kind of all, as a class, students included, agreed that the full body would work better because it incorporates the fact that if they were up face to face in the classroom, we can see the whole body, including shoes and, you know, what they're doing with their feet and things like that might have been missing from that half body. So we've added that to the rubric.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
This is a really important observation, and it's something that I think we're all struggling with from Jessica McCall, that their biggest challenge has been the issues of equity and identity for folks not willing to share their camera, not willing to be on camera, which John and I have talked about quite a bit, because in normal times, that would not be an option. Right. You would be physically co-present with people in class. And so I think it's super challenging. How have you all addressed that in terms of talking about it with students? Because I know I have some students who, and thank you, Jessica. I have some students who literally there's a wall behind them, and that's really all you need is a wall, or hang a sheet or a thing. But I'm curious what other things you guys have done to encourage that.
I can speak a little bit to a situation
where
we had an intro student who had transitioned, and that was the student who goes by she actually was coming to class in the beginning of the semester, but then unfortunately started experiencing a lot of bullying and sexual harassment, and so became very uncomfortable, and then did not want to show herself on camera. And so we have really worked with those students who and tried to figure out ways that we can just have them meet with the instructor one-on-one via a camera, or not have to demonstrate, not have to give the speech to the entire class, but just do it one-on-one. But that's definitely been the biggest issue for us, as well as students who, despite the time commitment that was asked, they are now working. And so they will have their phones on during the meeting, but they're at Target working. And so they certainly are not going to turn their cameras on and present. But we've been very, very flexible.
Thank you.
You know, this presents a specific problem for public speaking when the goal is to have, you know, self-presentation be a part of what you're learning, right? And one of the problems that happens here is that a certain momentum can develop. Like if you set an expectation at the beginning of the semester that it's important for folks to be present as much as possible, visibly and so forth. And then you start to say, okay, we're going to make some exceptions here. then there's this momentum that develops, and pretty soon no one wants to be visible, right? So there's this momentum issue. And I think the way we've been thinking about trying to address that is that to set a general expectation, because this is a public speaking course, right? And then to be very, to have the presence or absence be a part of the conversation, right? So that it doesn't turn into these dynamics that you can no longer address because they're happening faster than you can handle them. So if there's a person, so that's one of the ways we're trying to handle it, is to sort of be sensitive about it and talk about it.
If I can interrupt for a second, I require all of my students to be on camera for every class. Okay. And I don't make exceptions with a rare occasion. Like I had one student who wanted to attend class who was in hospital with COVID-19. And I told her she didn't have to turn the camera on. Okay. But all of them, if they don't have the camera on, I don't consider them to be in class unless they have a technical issue, in which case they have to warn me in advance. And I saw somebody else make a reference to how do you do presentations live? What I do is I give them co-host capability for the 5 or 6 minutes that they're supposed to present, and they do the presentation live, just like John is doing right now. Okay. And then I take it back and give it to the next student. It's a little hard to maneuver and it takes a little time, but it works quite well. I'm going to be doing that in an hour with my final presentations for one of my classes.
I want to jump in really quickly just for the sake of your own personal time management when you're grading. All of our presentations are synchronous in Zoom at IUB. And so it's exactly like a normal classroom. I've got 6 speeches in one day. I've got Q&A that pops up in the chat, and I have somebody moderating the chat, or I have people asking and so on. So, and I'm recording them, and then I share that link to the people who presented that day. But I can think of like no worse experience than watching a stack of recorded speech videos. Like I would rather gouge my own eyes out with a grapefruit spoon, friends, truly. So being able to do it live, if you can possibly swing it. I've had one student who's had such bad internet that the only way she was able to have it not cut out, the modification I made was that she recorded her speech and I played it live to the class and she did Q&A. That's the only time I've ever used a recorded one. So that's my random comment.
Cindy, since you mentioned the public speaking performance piece, I'll just offer a tip that we found to be really, really useful in our public speaking course, which is that we use the chat aggressively during performance days. And what we do is we require all students to ask a question in the chat of the speaker, right? And then we have a student who volunteers to curate the chat and to ask 2 questions from the chat to the students. So you sort of get your cake and eat it too there. You get all students participating who are not normally able to ask questions after a public speech, right? You get that piece of it, but you also get the exchange, the interchange, the question and answer session at the end and that turns out to be a very efficient use of the Zoom technology.
Okay. So I think we're caught up generally in chat with the topics that have appeared. There are some suggestions for things like if your students are using visual aids, that I would point you to the chat for some suggestions. We at Indiana University, we don't use visual aids for any of our speeches. So because they're not part of the Indiana State Higher Education Commission speaking and listening requirements. And that is why we don't have them, which actually is making our life a lot easier right now. So there are some suggestions in chat for those of you who are having them share presentation materials along with their speeches.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the next item is how we can encourage communication in a regular classroom. So when we're not having performance speech days, but we're having regular classroom sessions, how can you overcome the tendency of Zoom to be a passive experience with students? And so if you can sort of maybe offer some suggestions about that. I actually try to cultivate by talking with students about the fact that this is a medium that you have to try to overcome that two-dimensional feel. You have to actually use your hands, wave. You actually have to teach students to do that because they're not aware of that until you do that. You can have students share screens with the specific goals. You can do regular icebreakers and check-ins and debriefs. And as I said, cold calling skillfully. So what are some thoughts that people have about that, Cindy? Anything yet?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll just keep going then. How can we break the wall of silence? I'll show you my screen. I'll show you my screen for that. This is what I'm talking about when you first get on, when you start the class and you're waiting for kids to show up, and then you begin the class and everyone's just looking at you with the blank stare, that sort of thing. And what I have found is that the most valuable moments of the classroom are those first 5 minutes before the class has started, because that's where you can sort of break through that wall before it happens. And so I start to immediately, when people come on, I have that intimate moment where I can say, how are you doing? How's your life? And then when other students come on board, they're seeing that happening and they're seeing that it's a conversation, right? So you avoid the wall of silence before it ever happens. So I found that to be an extremely useful thing. I also have on here, I have 3 tips. Like I said there, you foster the call. Okay, so this is just how you break the wall of silence. And I call that the 5-minute window. And that's more or less repetition. Cindy, if you don't have anything more on this, we can move to the next one.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. That Howard is there early so that he can hang out and chat. I have a friend of mine at University of Dayton who sent me like 10 different mood check images that are hilarious. Hilarious. Like, what is your mood today on a scale of llamas? Okay. And so it's like a 9-up thing, and you pick the llama that best represents how you're feeling. So if you Google that, you're going to find stuff, and it's hilarious. And then that gets them started on the conversation. Like, no, I'm really feeling more like a 5, but I could be going to a 6. And so that's a thing. Ooh, I like, if you could write an animal into battle, which would you choose? So yeah, still make time for this silly stuff as an opener, because it just sort of greases the machinery.
Yeah. I'll share this. One of the things that I made a mistake at the beginning was to think of chat as just one thing. And when I began to realize that chat is actually many things. And so I couldn't even fit all of these things onto one slide, but I did anyway, right? Students grow up, texting. So it's so much easier for them to chat than it is to raise their hand and speak in class. So that's an affordance of Zoom, right? You can use the private features if you use them in responsible ways, right? So there's that piece of it. You can ask global questions. I have here that chat multiplies the opera students for every student to participate. So what are some ways that you've discovered that chat can be used in effective ways that maybe you hadn't thought about before in a communication classroom or in a regular classroom?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, so give some vamp music.
Dun, 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 dun. I'm not saying anything else yet. Mood checks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Compliments and feedback. Oh, that's nice.
Right.
I mean, I've done sort of the same thing that you would do with like a question of the day, right? So, if you could only have one kind of food for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? Pineapple on pizza, yes, no, discuss. like whatever it is, and they just kind of go to town, and then I'll call them out on it for further explanation. Like, tell us, John, you seem like really intense about this. What's behind that? There has to be a thing, right? And then you kind of go into it.
So here's a problem with chat that I want to ask you guys about. What are the ethics of chat? So, for instance, I have been asking myself, when should I participate in chat? So if something is going on in the regular classroom, maybe a student is speaking and something is developing in chat, should I contribute to that discussion? Am I distracting? Is there any way in which that could be felt as a power play? And so what are the ethics of chat? If I see, because the thing about multimodal learning like this is that two things can be going on at the same time, right? So as we're saying here today, we're interacting with each other face to face, but there's also this dialogue going on, which is sort of in parallel, but not necessarily in sync, right? So that's a difference from the regular classroom. So have you found that there are any ways in which that presents challenges to you in terms of that sort of double attention? A student that I had said recently, she used the word, I'm trying to follow, but I'm being distracted by what's going on in chat. So is that something that you try to address or work with? Do you use rules or rules of thumb in addressing that type of a thing?
Yeah, so they do get distracted talking about things that are not related to the class sometimes. And then when that's the case, Howard will gently intervene. Perhaps not gently, I don't know, but I imagine it's gently that he intervenes. And if they're asking questions in chat, like, it's difficult to split your attention, which is why I'm here looking at chat and John is talking. So I'll ask my students to make sure to help me if somebody raises a hand or if somebody's asking something that I haven't paid attention to, for them to help me notice that, get my attention. And I don't turn off the feature that lets them talk privately to one another, because I like to have that feature, and I think it's nice for them to be able to connect to each other. Some of the things I'm seeing here that are really good with using chat are using it as a pause for a takeaway, or what did you learn? What was the most important thing? And that's from Tim. Perhaps suggestions in the syllabus about like how we're going to use chat, or it could be a thing that you work out collaboratively, what kinds of things are appropriate for chat and not. Taking a lecture break to focus on a chat convo would be a really nice way. That's a great suggestion, Margaret, to shift that modality over. Really good idea.
Yeah. Okay. So switching topics then, using breakouts. Initially, this was the thing that I least liked because of the technical problems with breakouts. I thought it was the worst part of Zoom. Initially, the time that it takes to move around from one breakout room to another, my inability to sort of oversee all of the breakouts at once. There's a kind of the tendency for students to sort of, because they're in this private room, to not realize that I'm going to be visiting. All those things were initially problems for me. I did find solutions to them, but I'm wondering what your experience has been about with breakouts, both the way that they're bad and then what are best practices.
I just really love your graphic. Why do they suck so much? Yeah, it's really hard.
While the chat room is populating, I will say that the thing that was the most helpful to me was the taking the time before class to create usually a PDF of a carefully planned instruction for how the breakout room is to be used, right? So that meant including objectives, time, roles, report back responsibility. Once I did that, that was the single most valuable thing to making the breakout problems disappear, because students really like that. They like the structure of it. They feel responsible. When I visited the breakout rooms with that kind of a assignment, they were always working on it, and they felt like they had some, they were invested in the process then in a way which wasn't when I did a slapdash approach to it. So that was maybe the single biggest help for me with regard to breakout rooms.
Yvonne has, it's just a lovely description in chat of basically creating groups as students arrive to class for the purpose of them socializing and getting to know one another. So you can imagine like the first 5 or so folks who are showing up, she's got them in a group, getting to know one another, talking with each other in a smaller group, which seems to me like a really, really good idea, particularly early in the semester. And then she has some prompts available in case they need those things, which you can use that broadcast to all the groups thing, right? To send a little niblet of what you want them to do. But affording them some opportunities to talk about things that are not strictly on task seems like the heart of Yvonne's comment, which I think is really good. Howard hates breakouts too. What I have found so far that has the best effect is moving like a mad woman between the breakout rooms. Like, I can't even tell you how quickly it is. It's this quick. It's, here I am, and I moved. Like, it's almost like lightning round. And then they get desensitized to the fact that you're going to do that. And it's actually kind of the most similar to you wandering around in the classroom. Because if you don't do that or you wait too long, then you have a group that's like half of them aren't on camera and not participating at all, like they're not even there. So the more frenetic I am in my circulation, like a crazy shark, I feel like I have a little bit more success. Anybody else have suggestions for their breakouts? I'm having in and out of them. Yes. If you have the breakout room window open where all the groups are listed, then you can click join more quickly. Then you don't have that load time when you go in and out quite as bad. And I was doing it the first way for the beginning of it. And Lauren does this somewhat differently. So she chooses a room to stay in. So she's engaging a bit more with a group on that particular occasion. So, and then rotating like which group that's going to be, like what her focus group is going to be. And students know that people are going to jump in. So they're just kind of used to it. This is, Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about this? It's going to be easier for you to explain it, and it sounds awesome.
Yeah, sure. So I use breakout rooms, but always try to have something like directions written out in a Google Doc, which I use to go along with my Zoom synchronous courses, so students can follow along and I can include instructions. But either within that Google Doc, or I use Google Jamboards, which are a shared feature that's kind of like a flip chart. And so I have pre-copied those templates and provided links in that Google Doc. So that way students have a guide of what they're talking about or synthesizing or whatever it may be, but I can also see how the groups are progressing. And so depending on the time I've allowed, I can hop in and out. But like this morning, I gave them 7 minutes and I could see that they were working, and then they came back and shared that. And so that's been really helpful. And then it gives me a chance to monitor without going in and out of the rooms and interrupting their trains of thoughts.
Yeah.
That sounds so good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that linkage that you just described creating is so critical, right? So when they come back into the main room, having a student or two say what happened creates a bond between the breakouts and the main room, which otherwise feels disconnected. So that's a crucial link in all of this. Yeah. And then also this whole issue of how long you leave them in, that's something that we all have to experiment with. Sometimes we learn that we're doing it too quickly. Sometimes we're letting them sit in there too long. So finding just the right length of time to let them in there, to keep them in there, is really a crucial piece of that. Okay. All right, so I think we can move on to the next topic, and I will share my screen to show it with you. And that is, what are the virtual digital analogs? What are the performance principles specific to online orality, delivery adjustments, relations to screen frame, audio video production values? Okay, so this is a different medium, right? So we can't expect, and we wouldn't want our students to deliver their speeches in the same way. What do we use more informal conventions of speech in this relationship? Do we allow students to sit on their beds? Do we, allow them to dress differently? And then how do we address how delivery occurs in relationship to this more intimate space of conversation? What about eye contact? So how are you guys thinking about public speaking in terms of the translation between the public forum of the classroom versus the intimate space of the Zoom room?
Camera contact replacing eye contact. People are in Wisconsin. It's making me excited. I see it and I just want cheese curds. Focusing. All right, focusing. Yeah, I would say the camera contact and the eye contact, and that's coming up. The other thing I feel like when we have this discussion with our own graduate students, John, that people tend to really fixate on this a little bit differently than I do, because if you're staring down the camera, then you're not actually looking at the people in Zoom. And I don't know, when you guys are teaching, right, you're looking around the room kind of. So I don't think we should hold our students to a standard that we're not ourselves doing. And it's just really weird to just stare into the camera and not look at the faces. So I try to not like over freak out about that, right? I want meaningful engagement from you and have it not look or sound like you're reading from a script. But beyond that, so Katie, these are really good suggestions. Maintaining the usual standards with just adjustments where necessary. So what's eye contact, and then giving them kind of a document with some tips for these things, guidelines for virtual speaking, etc.
Yeah, so the thing the huge issue for us is XSTEM, right? Because the temptation is just absolutely huge to have your script up on the screen. I don't know if you guys are finding that. Yeah, I see Charlotte nodding your head. We're really thinking a lot about that over the last summer and then fall semester. We continue to come back again and again to that question because it turns out that it's just so much better when you speak extemporaneously than this mechanical reading from a script, right? But tearing students away from that when it's so easy for them to, cheat doing that, right? If that's our methodology, ends up being a real challenge. And so we're still working through the pedagogy of that. If some of you have feelings about that, opinions, convictions, or techniques or skills about how you work with that, I might, Elena has some, I'll send it over to you, Cindy, because I see some stuff popping up here.
Which is, is there a hand that I'm missing? Okay, because there's a lot of guys. So yeah, this kind of observation from Charlotte, like I'm right there with you, that reading the script seems to lead, or has the potential to lead to reading somebody else's speech, right? Like we would like this to feel like it's yours. So that's challenging. Elena's having them use note cards. We're having them use note cards because they are, it's not a script. We actually make them show their cards too. We actually have them like upload their note cards or literally be like, here are my cards. So that you can see that I'm using cards and not a manuscript. Yeah, it's a challenge, right? And their grade does suffer, as Katie's observing, from lack of eye contact, etc. So like we're not just trying to give you tasks to be crazy making, we know that if you read, you're going to have all of these challenges that you don't want. Like, trust us, it's better for you if you don't read, because if you do read, it affects your delivery in all these ways. Yeah, and some of them are still so even if your assignment says to use note cards, and then we see that there's a script, right? So the way that we would evaluate that is a kind of a deduction off of extemporaneous delivery. Like, that's where it would come from. But yeah, go for it. Thanks, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you. Because I've been trying to address this. My class got put on, I got 2 weeks to get my class online. It was originally supposed to be a face-to-face. And then, yeah, I'm sure plenty of the rest of you are in the same boat. And, it's mostly freshmen, so they haven't got a clue what's going on. Just finished watching the last of their speeches, and I just wanted to tear my hair out. So I've been trying to think, can I step this up in a different way? Can I scaffold the speeches so that they will be less dependent on it, because they're reading their speeches off the screen. I can tell that. I can tell this is not their words. They're reading somebody else's paper, which once again makes me want to tear my hair out. So I'm thinking maybe if I start by breaking one speech per semester into the introduction, and we just work on the introduction, and I want to see your note cards, and I want you to stand, and I can't ask them to have an audience in the room because of COVID-19. I can't ask them to go out there and expose themselves. So then some of them, though, for my eCore class, they started showing a screen where people are zooming in, and I thought, great, but then freshmen, they don't know how to do that yet. So anyway, have any of you had any thoughts on that? Do you think that scaffolding it down, where you just break a speech into parts and say, here, I want you to do this first and then this? Have anybody tried that, or does it sound like it might work?
I feel like it has the potential to work, for sure. We tend to, this is not perfect. This is not like working every single time, y'all. But when we have them do like outline peer review, now that we're in this situation where we're not meeting all together, we do a lot of, you're extemporizing through this thing in breakout rooms. You're
Right.
doing these things in breakout rooms. You're doing an activity where I had you bring in an article today, and I need you to make a note card with no more than 5 words on it. And I need you to use that to teach this article to the people in your room, like sort of building the skills that they need in order to do that.
Okay.
We
All right.
also removed full sentences from our outlines completely.
Okay.
We
All
want
right.
that.
So they're doing this in the breakout rooms then?
Yeah, they're doing that in breakouts.
Okay, because I've had them do that with their outlines in a note card exercise, where I had them
Yeah.
take Mary Had a Little Lamb, 3 Little Pigs. They could pick I had like 5 nursery rhymes they could choose from, and they had to make note cards based on that. But I kind of like your idea for articles better.
Because you could tell them to bring in whatever they want. Like, I don't care if they talk about the Kardashians for 2 minutes. Okay, they're like out of fashion these days. But, like, I don't care what you tell people. It's the process of boiling that down to something that you then can expand, and just doing that forever. Just doing it constantly to make that transition easier. John?
Yeah, Kate says something really interesting here.
Well,
That
I'm
the
gonna go
hide self-view in Zoom actually
yes.
encourages them to be able to do this. So they do it in steps rather than full self-representation. That's fascinating.
You know what? I've recommended that to students too. What's really interesting is I always leave my self view on, because I'm too paranoid that like something is amiss that I would not see. Somebody comes in behind me. But yeah, because it is a lot. I am looking at myself while I'm presenting to you, and you as well. So that is an excellent suggestion, Katie.
One thing that we're discovering, for another thing that I don't understand why it's happening, but the breakout rooms seem to encourage actual performance exercises in a way that small group in class doesn't. For some reason in the classroom, it's harder to get students to do actual performances, right, with each other in small groups. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but in the Zoom breakout room, when you give them instructions and you visit, they're actually doing the performance exercises. At least for me, that seems to be an affordance that I don't quite understand.
I think I know what it is.
What is it?
Which I just put in chat. I don't think they're self-conscious about the group they're working with. I think they're self-conscious about all the other groups of students in the class when you ask them to do stuff in a class. And so if I'm in a breakout room with only 5 people, it's only those people. It's not 25 people watching what our group is doing. That's my theory, but.
So Margaret says, if they have a laptop and smartphone, I suggest to my students to pull up Outline on Microsoft Word to use at note cards or to create a separate PowerPoint for their note cards so they can see it on their smartphone. Wow.
That also works, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to move it on to the next little thing here because we're closing in. And the question I'm asking here is, it's a rhetorical question, really, because I really, this is one of my firmest convictions. And this was the thing for me that was the crossing of the boundary from the uncanny to the canny when I was in the late spring, which was, does Zoom teaching have a different rhythm? And what I found was that in order for that Zoom experience to be invigorating and for it to work, for me to feel fulfilled by the time class was over, was that the class had to be punctuated. Every single class had to be punctuated with a certain number of interactive experiences with the students. And they could be anything. You know, they could be a poll, they could be the silly, icebreakers at the beginning, they could be the more involved. I found that in general, you can only do in a 50-minute class, you can only do 2 major interactive events, maybe a major one and a minor one, right? Because you're doing stuff around them. But the idea that the class hour itself is punctuated with events so that students don't get into a passive state ever, because they're moving from one active interactive experience to the next, made all the difference in the world for my classes. I left feeling, having left that feeling of unfulfillment, of passivity. So that's the word I use to describe this. So my answer to this question is yes, Zoom teaching has a different rhythm. It is sort of incumbent on you to make this thing work, to do that, to choreograph the classroom experience, even regular classroom experiences, so that the students are being engaged and actively engaged, whether it's the chat, whether it's whatever, any of these affordances, whether it's the whiteboard, whatever you use it for, you have to provide a kind of a rhythm to that classroom experience. So that's my little spiel on that. But I just testify to that really makes all the difference for me. Lauren has a fascinating comment, Cindy, there. It's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. As Zoom teachers, we become just one more component in their attention economies. We need to give them incentives for them to stay engaged. God, it's so true, right?
Yeah. I'm gobsmacked by Howard having to teach a 4-hour class. That's insane. I don't even know what I would do. But anything, like if you were physically doing it in person, you would probably have breaks and stuff, right? So what can I do?
I give them a break, but this is an 8-week class.
Oh my God.
1 day a week, 4-hour session. That's my 15-week class combined into 8 weeks. Basically.
Absolutely brutal.
I have I have a 15, a 13, and an 8. And I have to double up on lectures. So I usually do a lecture, then we have discussion, then I do another lecture, then we have some interaction, then we take a break, then we do another lecture. I've also given the students an opportunity, but skip the break and just end the class at 3.5 hours, which we also have done a couple of times. Yeah. But that was the class that I think failed miserably on Zoom. The rest of them seem to be all right.
I would imagine, I mean, it's just really a challenge. Jessica's observation here is really good too, that considering choreography between Zoom sessions and complementary posted videos of things, that while if we're all teaching in person, we might show some of these things in class, that there can be a way of having them do some of those things outside and then build it in, which can help with that, like maintaining that sort of variety and that movement.
Yeah, and that's the affordance of Zoom here is really in terms of time. You know, if you're doing sticky notes on the board and you're having students brainstorm, that's a huge activity in a regular classroom. In Zoom, it's as easy as go to your whiteboard, you know? So there are affordances of that kind as well. And then there's this 3-hour, oh my gosh, Lauren, 3 hours, a 3-hour class. I can't even imagine that.
That's how long my grad classes were, but grad class seems different to me in some ways than actually grad class that's 3 hours on Zoom sounds excruciating. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm gonna share. Here's a question I'm gonna ask you guys. This is not a rhetorical question, because I said in the introduction that Zoom provides a more intimate experience, and I'm actually want to ask you this question: what does the Zoom classroom experience feel like to you? There's a sense in which I feel as though it feels more intimate with the students. Like I'm able to have more informal conversations with them more easily in the way that I wasn't in the classroom. I'm able to touch base with them more regularly. It feels like a more safe space for me with them, but I don't really assume that's universal. And also this use of the word intimate seems very odd to be saying that in the context of a technology that's by its very nature sort of distancing, right? We call it distance learning, right? So maybe that's a paradox or maybe it's not. So what do you guys think about that? What is this experience in the classroom in this virtual way been for you? How would you describe it?
There's a suggestion about guest speakers in classes over Zoom, which I think is a great idea, right? Variety, the size of the class, 20-person class versus a 40-person class makes it really difficult. It is challenging. I'm going back and forth between you guys, and some of you are always, you know, on page 2 in looking. Depends on the group. I feel like, I mean, for the most part, I like learning things about my students because of quirky stuff that I notice. Like, if there's a cat, you know, in the room or whatever, I'm like, okay, who's the cat? Bring the baby over. Like, I need to know who the cat is. We're going to pull this train over until you tell me who this animal is. And so there's things like that that I absolutely love about it. Erica is agreeing that it's been more intimate than she thought that it would be. And the ability to do office hours and quick meetings that way, rather than presumably hanging out in your office for 2 hours when no one appears. And this probably sums it up from Jessica, that there's more connection with some students and more disconnection with others.
Yeah. Yep.
Right, because this is nobody's choice. Yep. To take this particular version of a class, because I'm imagining we're all under constraints as to the format that this thing that you're offering has to have done, has to have taken. Right.
We're running up on the hour, so I did want to share. Maybe you do a screen capture of that if that's something that's interesting to you. There is a book now out on this transition that's really pretty good. And then there's a Chronicle, an Inside Education article, which I found very helpful. Most of the stuff you feel online when you Google, you know, Zoom instruction is so basic that it doesn't help much. But these are more elaborate. If you guys have resources that you would like to share, maybe a link you could put in the chat. I'm gonna, has everyone got a screenshot of that needs it? I can also share that later. Maybe what I can do is I can just sort of copy that over to chat. And then there's the online teaching survival guide. These are some of the topics in that. So you can see from this list that this person has really thought very carefully and deeply about the ways in which the Zoom translates for the public, for the teaching situation. So we've come to the end. You guys can, as you know, in your chat, if you go down to the bottom and click the 3 dots, you should be able to save your chat. We'll also probably make an edited version of it available to everybody because some folks aren't here in case there are comments, tips, links, or whatever that you would like to hold on to. And so that brings us right to the top of the hour. We're at 2 o'clock, Joe. I don't know if Joe's still here or Susan. But it's been really great having you all. I hope this has been useful to you. Hi, hey, Joe. And Cindy, thank you so much for that able choreographing of the chat room.